So, revived from the Organization of African Unity (OAU) to African Union in 2001, the African Union, an international organization comprising 54 independent states in Africa and Western Sahara, aims to promote regional integration, interstate solidarity, peace, and good governance while enhancing Africa's voices in the global stadium or in the global system. Despite some strides made on the continent, the role of the African Union in mediating electoral disputes for peaceful transition of power in member states has heavily been questioned, and it has been silenced on many of the developments affecting the political stability in the sub-region. Today on Citizens, we will be having a conversation about the role of the African Union in mediating peaceful transition among member states. Our guest to do this particular conversation is governance expert Dr. Ibrahima Kane and Ecowas and AU policy analyst Emmanuel Bensah. So let me begin with you, Mr. Ibrahima Kane, and want to find out from you how effectively has the African Union been in mediating electoral disputes in member states, particularly with what key factors contribute to its successes and failure in this particular role?
Well, when it's come to election, the involvement of any international institution or international organization is political. Is political in the sense that it's to try really to make sure that the country not only accept the result of the election, but also the country comply with its obligation. The idea of election observation is a political idea, is to really help to make sure that people accept the legitimacy of a system or the legitimacy of a government and other stuff. It started in the 19th century, by the way, in Europe first, and then in Asia with the recognition of South Korea, and then in Africa. So I think when you talk about the dispute, it's something that is really natural for a regional organization, particularly in Africa, where we have a legal framework, not only about democracy, but also about how elections should be organized. The involvement of the institution is really natural because it's part of its mandate.
And so one would ask that in all of these, what has been the work of AU as part of its body or mandate of ensuring interstate solidarity, peace, and good governance? It seems like over the years, AU would look on, just as the United Nations. There's been lots of concerns that the United Nations is not being proactive and even helping to solve some of the security issues in some member countries. But the AU also on the continent as well seems to be sitting on the fence to watch the country exhaust all of its internal mechanisms. And if it's not going on well, we still do not see the AU come on board. Why is that so? And does that make the AU a proactive body?
Well, I think we need to understand also how the system operates within the continent. AU is our continental body, but there are what we call building blocks of African integration, which are the regional economic communities. And each regional economic community is autonomous in the way they monitor state compliance with their obligation when it's come to election and other stuff. Don't forget that in West Africa, in the past, Ecowas refused to supervise the election in the Gambia. Ecowas refused to do many things in some countries, but Ecowas also, as we know, is a weak institution, is an institution dominated by one country, we like it or not, which is Nigeria. So you never hear Ecowas even and questioning the way elections are conducted in Nigeria. So the dynamic within the region and the dynamic at the continental level also explain how the regional or the continental body operates. I think we need to take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, what will be really the key issue when it's come to election dispute is how we implement, how the AU implement its own norms regarding election, and also how the mechanisms that are in place, because those mechanisms are divided into two categories. You have one that is just political, and you have one that deals with peace and security. And all of them have mandate regarding election. So the question is, when one can take over the other when it's come to deal with election dispute. All of those issues are really very important, and the history of the African Union so far have not also helped to really say these are the main trends on the continent, because almost in each election you have a new way of dealing with issues. I'm just giving you a latest example, which is the electoral problem in Mozambique, which is under the supervision of SADC. But as you see, SADC seems to be unable to deal with the issue. People are dying every day. There is a crisis. Even the chairperson of SADC is not saying anything. But at the same time, we are not seeing the AU taking over and trying to deal with the issue. Is it related to the fact that SADC doesn't want the AU to take over? Or is it because the AU itself is unable to deal with the matter? These are questions that has different responses. You see how complex is the situation. And the UN, because when you look at the UN treaty, the UN leaves the issue to the regions. And if the region are unable or unwilling to deal with the matter, that's where the UN comes in and also try to offer its its services. And we all know what's the UN also. It's a member state driven process. And if one member of the UN Security Council say no, it's over. So it's a really complicated issue.
It's really a complicated issue, Dr. Ibrahima Kane says. But let me bring in Mr. Emmanuel Bensah at this particular point in time, because he's also had the opportunity to work at the regional bloc level as well as the African Union stage as well, particularly on matters of ECOSOC, where happens to be with economic and then cultural issues regarding civil society activism on the continent as well. So, Mr. Emmanuel Bensah, from where you sit, what are some of the challenges that the African Union faces when trying to intervene in electoral disputes? Mr. Ibrahima Kane has stated that they are regional blocks first. So if ECOWAS, among other regional blocks, are unable to really deal with it first before it gets to the African Union side. But from where you sit, having to work bits and pieces with ECOSOC, among other issues, what are some of the challenges that the African Union really faces when trying to intervene in electoral disputes, particularly in member states that are entrenched on political divisions or authoritarian regimes?
So in many ways, I agree with what Doc is saying, but I think one of the most important things we must remember about the role of the AU, I think in many ways this conversation is important. It's important questions, but it's also a non-starter. I think after 20 years of the AU in progress, we need to get to the place where we realize that the AU does not intervene in countries. The AU is an intergovernmental organization, which means that it can superintend over elections. That is why through the Pan-African Parliament, it sends observers, and through Commonwealth Secretariat, all these other stakeholders, they send observers, and the AU supports. Where we can say the AU has been the most explicit has been in West Africa, and I have to disagree with Doc on the fact that ECOWAS is the weakest. ECOWAS is the weakest and is led by Nigeria. That's simply not true. Nigeria hosts ECOWAS institutions, but I think the record will show that ECOWAS is probably one of the more successful regional integration blocks in the manner in which it has sought to promote democracy and sought to have member states adherent to democracy, to the extent that it has even caused a rift with the Sahara countries because of last year Tinubu coming out, the Nigerian president coming out too strongly to ensure that the Saharan countries had complied with the sanctions and wanted to send troops. It's some of all these things that has caused suspicion by the Sahel countries of what ECOWAS's true intentions are. But what we have seen in the past with the AU and ECOWAS is that ECOWAS has led because it is the regional bloc in question in West Africa, electoral disputes and so on. And then they have had support of the UN Office of West African Sahel based in Dakar and the African Union through the Peace and Security Council supporting the ECOWAS. So ECOWAS leads as the first interlocutor. Then they are backed up with statements by UN Office of West African Sahel in Dakar, as the institution of the UN in Dakar, promoting good offices on democracy and so on, backed by the AU and others. And that's how it has gone. When we look back at many elections that have happened in the past, whether it's the electoral violence that happened in Kenya in 2006, 2007, the AU never ever intervened in some of these. The AU does not have the right to intervene. It can only offer good offices for electoral disputes. And that is why people often criticize the AU, because at the end of the day, an election is a national event with yes, all eyes are on it from all stakeholders and UN agencies and whatever else. Yes, you have all eyes on an election, but an election is still a national event. In Ghana, the election was still a national event with regional consequences if things have gone wrong, because we don't live in isolation. We have borders, and so if there had been challenges, it would have affected. ECOWAS might needed to have come in and so on. But it was still led. It was led by the electoral management body of Ghana, not a continental one, a national one. And so, any disputes, even in Ghana, as you may know, we have challenges still underway following the election that has been held. And yet it is being resolved at the national level. Some of the things are being taken to court at the national level. The AU has no business coming to enter and say that it is challenging parliamentary results. And so that's not the AU's business. We belong to the AU. We are a member of the African Union. And so, of course, the AU would want to know what is going on, and they will offer support and encourage Ghana to do the right thing. As Doc said, because we have international norms we have to adhere to. But the AU is not going to fly in and say that we have issues with parliamentarian disputes. One party is trying to recollate, and therefore the AU will come in. It doesn't happen that way. So I think that's the most important thing we must remember. Every election is a national event. There are regional consequences, of course, and that is where regional bodies will come in. ECOWAS, SADC, ECAS, or whichever regional body will come in, because sometimes there are implications at the regional level. If an election goes wrong, there will be challenges. But it is not to say that the AU is the one that is going to. The AU is on permanent. Is on standby 24/7 at the Peace and Security Council with the 15 members there who monitor elections and monitor peace and security challenges on the continent, and they write statements to the effect of encouraging member states to do the needful and by adhering to the principles, the charters such as the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, and so many other charters that govern the AU and support member states. Because the AU has a series of protocols and architecture that helps promote good governance. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance that was operationalized in 2012 is one of them. but it's not the only one. The AU also has the African peer review mechanism that promotes good governance on the continent. That's been around since 2003, and that encourages member states to promote good governance in country.
Right.
So the AU at the end of the day can never win, and I think 20 years down the line, we should move on from this conversation of feeling that the AU has to intervene. And I think the fact that we are still talking about it reflects the paucity of conversations by media around issues around the AU, because it has never been the case. And I think the fact that you're having this conversation is great, but I think also we must do better, the media included, in reporting some of these things. The questions that I saw were great, but I think most of them for me was just a non-starter, because after all that we have seen in other countries, questions like these are null and void. I mean, each country is a sovereign nation. How would you expect the AU to just jump in and say that because they are paying dues to the AU, they're coming to resolve? It doesn't happen like that when there's a regional body.
But in times that, Mr. Bensah, in times that the regional body, in other words, Ecowas, seem to not to be really responding to the needs and concerns of citizens who democratically are yearning for democratic rule, but people at the helm of affairs. In particular, we can look at the case of Togo, for instance. I mean, their democracy, in terms now, is set to be parliamentary democracy, but the people want the opportunity to vote for their president, and yet at this time, that is not really happening. ECOWAS has still not been able to really make any conclusive statement to that particular effect, and the African Union has also not been able to really do that. So we're finding out, are there some peculiar challenges that you think could be hindering AU to really send some messages or some statements to those countries where their leadership would know that, look, we want democracy?
I think the best that the African Union can do is just to encourage member states to follow through democratic principles, because I think we must hammer home this point: the fact that the African Union does not intervene in member states unless there's people are being killed, unless there's genocide. Article 3H speaks to responsibility to protect. Article 3H of the AU's Constitutive Act, that reflects the responsibility to protect. That is, when the acts of genocide, when the acts of violence beyond the country, the AU then has a right to intervene. But other than that, when it comes to elections, the AU has no business but encourage member states to be more democratic, because many of the member states have already ratified. Some of these protocols. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance has been ratified by no less than 34 members of the AU. So if that charter promotes good governance and member states have decided to tweak their constitution and do, that's not the business of the AU. You can only say, let's hold a meeting, let's have conversation, let's have stakeholder discussions on why. And to the issue of Togo, even West Africa, even ECOWAS itself has had challenges with Togo. In 2017, 2016, 2015, 2016, when Togo Yasimbe was the chairman of ECOWAS and there were challenges, there were challenges in Togo. ECOWAS had its hands tied, because here you had the case of the ECOWAS chairman with a problem in his own neighborhood, and ECOWAS could not talk. For many months, ECOWAS could not say anything because diplomatically it was not the right thing to do. And the AU could not do anything either. The UN also could not say anything. So in matters of diplomacy, some of these things, it's also about sovereignty. What are your boundaries? Where can we talk and where can we not talk? And when it comes, the AU cannot enforce, go in, it's not a police officer.
Mr. Benson, the conversation is not really about internal electoral affairs issues and stuff like that, but the conversation has to also do with transition of power. If genuinely one particular for instance, what is really happening in Mozambique, the people have voted, the longest serving president party still resist the result of the people. In this case, clearly, the regional bloc over there, together with AU, have the opportunity to at least make a statement that let the people breathe, let the will of the people prevail. But in cases that we do not see that peaceful transition is what we want to find out, that what could be some of the stumbling blocks affecting AU in communicating some things like that.
I think that's a good question. I think it's about political will, because what is happening in Mozambique is an anomaly. We have seen peaceful transitions of power, of elections throughout this year, all over Botswana, South Africa, so on and so forth. What we are seeing with Mozambique is an anomaly, and I've had this discussion in different spaces with different people, and it reflects the weakness of SADC. SADC is a weak institution as far as political transitions and promotion of democracy is concerned. And I think it needs to do a lot more work on building its capacity around that. If this had been in West Africa, I can guarantee you that there would have been special envoys that would have been sent. There would have been meetings of the Mediation and Security Council. An extraordinary summit would have been held in Ecowas, and so on and so forth. None of that has happened in SADC. And this has been a pattern that we have seen with SADC. SADC just does not have the political will or has the institutional structure to respond to peace and security issues in the way that ECOWAS does. And for me, that's a weakness, because SADC would have been the one to say that what's happening in Mozambique is regrettable, it's wrong. Let's call for an emergency summit of the Troika, of the peace and security in SADC, and let's see what we can do. Do we send a UN envoy, call on the UN or the AU to send an envoy to look at? But none of that is happening. And it just, for me, just highlights the fact that SADC has a lot of work to do. So yes, we can blame the AU in this one as well, but at the end of the day, under the principle of subsidiarity, which is to say that the AU gives responsibility of peace and security issues to the regional organization in the region. The SADC has failed. Let's put it that way. SADC has failed. Contrast that to what we saw in Gabon last year, when Gabon had a crisis. Gabon is the host of the Economic Community of Central African States. And there was a threat to move the headquarters from Gabon to another member state. For the first time, some of us were amazed that Gabon had shown its teeth. The ECAS had shown its teeth that it was going to threaten to move its headquarters to another state because of the crisis that had happened in Gabon. So when the regional organization does not show its teeth, there's little the AU can do.
Okay.
The AU can talk in the background, and say, look, what are you guys going to do? But it is for the regional body to say that this is our problem, this is our regional headache.
Okay.
Let us see what we can do. But if that does not happen, the AU cannot force them.
Okay.
And that is the paradox of the peace and security conversation on the continent.
Okay. Mr. Ibrahima Khan, let me also bring you in at this particular point where we would want to find out that at this point on the sub-region of ECOWAS, in the sub-region in West Africa here, we've seen ECOWAS 15 member countries. If care is not taken by early next year or after the 6-month transition period, we could be reduced to 12 member countries, because the 3 AES countries are bent on exiting the bloc. And in all of these, even I think it's in Niger, citizens are unhappy with the fact that the transition junta still wants to negotiate for extension of stay in power. They are eagerly wanting a civilian transition rule at this point. In all of these, seeing the work that ECOWAS is doing and AU also observing, as we said, AU cannot directly come on board until the regional blocs actually take up the mandate to do something. In all of these, how would you expect the AU to act, particularly in relation to the 3 AES countries on the sub-region of West Africa?
Well, from January, end of January, these 3 countries will no longer belong to ECOWAS. And the fact that they will no longer belong to ECOWAS mean that the AU will now have to directly talk to them, not without using anymore the ECOWAS in trying to persuade them to do A, B, C, D. That's the first thing. The second one means that these three countries will be also very isolated when it's come to their participation to any activity within the AU, because they don't belong to any regional bloc that is recognized by the AU. You know, AU recognizes only 8 regional bodies. And of course, they belong to, for example, to CENSAT. But so far as, you know, a building block that deals with election at the AU level and other matters, they will be completely isolated. For the rest, I think the the ECOWAS now has to get itself better organized. Yeah, the ECOWAS was 16 members. When Mauritania left ECOWAS, it didn't change a lot. And I think now ECOWAS has to really make sure that the countries respect the norm, the spirit and the letter of the normative framework that we have. Because, you know, you cannot belong to an entity, you cannot belong to a regional body, a continental body, and still claiming, you know, sovereignty and other. Because the fact that you belong to regional entity means that you abandon part of your sovereignty, particularly when it's come to accepting to be part of regional treaties or continental treaties. It means that on those issues dealt with by the regional treaty, you abandon your sovereignty on those issues. I think that issue needs to be clarified, because you can't say that you are part of the African Charter on Democracy, Election and Governance, and that the AU or the regional economic body has no say on what is happening in your country. It's not, it contradicts the fact that you belong to the entity. So I think that issue needs to be really clarified.
And so at this point, what should be the conversation that the African Union should be having with these particular 3 people?
Well, you know, these 3 people so far are also suspended by the AU. So they are not participating into any AU activities until they come back to normality, or they, you know, the transition to the civilian government is formalized. As long as that is not done, AU or ECOWAS will not, ECOWAS is finished by January, AU will not participate to any proceedings with them. That is the reason I was saying that now they will be completely isolated. They will be completely isolated, and I don't see how now, unless, you know, AU trying to help them to accelerate the transition process. But I'm doubtful about that possibility, because in Mali, for instance, it's clear that the military will continue to run this country because they want Goïta. You know, everybody knows that Goïta is trying to do everything to be the next president of Mali. And I'm pretty sure that Traoré and the president of Niger will be in the same, are also in that same direction. So I really don't know what will happen in 2025 with these 3 countries, because they have to show that they will leave power and give the power to civilians if they want their country to return back to normality.
Of course, we've seen that many of the reasons that citizens in these 3 countries give is the fact that, look, they've tested civilian rule and they were disappointed by civilian rule. Many of them were power drunk and they stayed on for long. They were characterized by lots of corrupt activities. and cost of living, or socioeconomic activities were not really in the best interest, rather favoring the elite and then the very few people who have the opportunity to be in power. But under the regime of military rule that in these three countries, they seem to be having some social equitable distribution of resources for at least enhancing life activities over there. And so, if anything, could we say that under the watch of Ecowas and AU, who are supposed to be the mother body of democracy and good governance, individual countries have failed under them? Therefore, people are rather yearning for the military rule the more. Because recent study in Ghana's Afrobarometer report shows that people even want a return to military rule, if not for the fact that democratically citizens are aware of their rights and then they have to vote at the end of the 4 years.
Well, I hear you, but at the same, for me, it's the failure of ECOWAS and the AU in upholding the norms that they have on democracy election that led to the return of the military regime in these three countries. If ECOWAS, every time in a country, in a West African country, there is a failure of the government to implement ECOWAS norms and principles. If ECOWAS, particularly the commission, ECOWAS commission, takes the lead and deal with the matter, even by taking the country to ECOWAS Court of Justice, the situation would have changed. In Senegal, for instance, when you remember, last year, when President Macky Sall locked up the leaders of the opposition, dissolved the political party and other stuff. What did ECOWAS say? And all those decisions were wrong and in total contradiction with ECOWAS normative framework. But ECOWAS didn't do anything. The AU didn't do anything. And that led, we are lucky in Senegal because, we had in our society other mechanisms that help us to deal with the issues. But in other countries, the only option is the military government, particularly in countries where that already experience military government. In Mali, people demonstrated to say they are happy with the return of military government and other places. And for me, that is really the failure of our regional institution. They fail to really make sure that the norm that they adopted are not implemented by to make sure that the norm they adopted were implemented by member states. It was not done. So this, what you are describing, is for me the failure of our regional institution. And the second part of it for me is also the fact that the voice of the people are not heard. And the voice of the people are not heard in our system, meaning that for me, that what we call the representative democracy has its limitation in our region. We need to really move from that system to more participative democracy, where, for instance, people can make a petition to provoke a referendum on a particular issue where the political leaders or the political class fail to realize what we want. That's, for me, something that people need to look at now more and more, because every time we have all these crises is because the voice of the people were not heard, or the people were unable to do anything to alert the system about its own failure to deal with that problem. So something needs to be done at that level.
And so if something needs to be done at that level, Mr. Bensah, let me bring you in, because you are of the opinion that, look, AU is like a higher body that has other subjects under it, i.e. ECOWAS and then the various regional blocks. And so AU cannot directly intervene at countries' respective issues unless all other avenues actually fail. But could AU change its tactics to become a much more proactive continental body? Because from the main reason that AU was changed from Organization of African Union, OAU, was the fact that it is deemed as a superior body made for only the elite. But when it comes to, but for its transition into African unity, which is AU, it was proposed to be an ordinary people-centered international institution. And so, respectively, individual countries, just as Mr. Ibrahima Khan said, if the people are unhappy, the people can petition and then call for referendum among stuff like that. AU has the opportunity to directly listen and then intervene. But in your approach, you believe that AU cannot because they has other sub-regional blocks. Do you think there's a need for AU to reconsider its mechanisms in solving this kind of regional electoral disputes?
Okay, I just have a few minutes, John, so let me try and make it quick. So it's not about me and my approach. It's about the reality on the ground. At the end of the day, the AU is it's a governmental body, but it's an intergovernmental body with a number of specialized institutions. Okay,
It's
the
not
AU has specialized
about 3 minutes.
institutions that that
How many
help
minutes have we
support the
done?
work that it does. So when you're talking about the AU, maybe you're talking about the AU Commission in Addis, which is the administrative
I'm
body
in
of
and
the
out.
Peace and Security. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello.
Yes, I can listen to you.
Yeah, so maybe you're talking about the Peace and Security Council. Yes, the Peace and Security Council has a mandate to deal with peace and security issues. But the AU itself, I think we are confusing things here. The African Union is an intergovernmental body with specialized institutions that deal with sector-specific issues. So on democracy, the AU has protocols that member states sign. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance is one of them. The African Peer Review Mechanism is an institution of the AU that promotes good governance, and they have also supported in promoting good governance and getting member states to look within their own country on how well they do, how well they promote democracy. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance is there. The number of other protocols that the AU has. It has the African Court of Justice, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So all these institutions are what make up the AU. So I think we make a mistake jumping the gun to say that the AU is not doing enough because there are specialized institutions that have to do. And when it comes to peace and security, the African Union has the African governance architecture, which is populated by specialized institutions of the African Union that have a mandate for promoting good governance. So there's a Pan-African Parliament, there's the African Peer Review Mechanism, there's the Child and Rights Welfare Child based in Lesotho. There are a number of other AU institutions and regional economic communities that have the mandate of promoting, that are part of the African governance architecture that help support the AU in promoting the good governance agenda. Ecowas, on the other hand, has the sovereignty of member states of Ecowas enable Ecowas to pass binding decisions that affect the member states directly. So anytime Ecowas takes a decision, the authority, which is the highest level, takes a decision at Ecowas, those protocols, those decisions are binding on the member states and they have to act accordingly. On the other hand, when it comes to the African Union is a population of AU member states. They have programs like the Agenda 2063, which is a continental blueprint for how the government, the continent should be by 2063. 7 aspirations, 14 flagship projects, etc., etc. One of the aspirations of the AU is a peaceful and secure Africa. Aspiration 7 speaks to an AU as a global player, and so on and so forth. So it is a number, the AU is a number of all these things, the specialized institutions, the protocols, and all these other things that make it what it is. But at the end of the day, the AU is also about political will. If member states do not have the political will to make things happen, things will not move. And when it comes to peace and security, all the more so. The AU has the expertise on peace and security. It has structures. It has a African peace and security architecture. It has the African governance architecture. and all these other frameworks, Council of the Wise, and so on and so forth. But if the political will is not coming from some member states, things will not move. So at the end of the day, we need to do some introspection to see what are the best practices that are happening at the regional level. ECOWAS, for all its challenges, all its faults, and all its weaknesses, when it turns 50 years in May next year, there are still a lot of good things that ECOWAS has done that we can look to as best practices for how peace and security can be prosecuted on the continent. There are a lot of countries, regions that are learning from ECOWAS, how ECOWAS has been able to bring civil society together with member states at the table to look at how peace can be resolved. Liberian conflict in 1990 was largely resolved because the women of the sub-region were tired of their men being killed from 1990 to 97. So they came to Accra. There was civil society that came together and helped raise the issue, and ECOWAS listened. And they finally they put paid to Charles Taylor eventually. So ECOWAS has a history, a commendable history of how peace and security can be prosecuted. But it does not foreclose the challenges that Doc has talked about. The fact that it has not responded to Senegal, does not responded to Niger, has not responded to there. Those are issues that largely are drawn by the fact that it also reflects, depends on the chairperson that you have at the ECOWAS level. When you have an ECOWAS chair that is not as responsive as people like Dr. Ibn Chambers, who were more forthcoming in making sure that ECOWAS held its own on being a peace and security institution in the sub-region, you will have things moving slowly. So at the end of the day, the reality on the ground is that the AU is you and me. What are we also doing in our own right as civil society? Put pressure on our foreign affairs, our civil society, to ensure that they are also reflecting conversations around how the AU can work together with our regional bodies, the ECOWAS, the SADC, the ECAS, and so on, to make sure that we have a more peaceful continent. Because the AU...
Hello, Mr. Benson? Mr. Benson? Okay, so Mr. Ibrahima Khan, let me take your final wrap-up comment while we try to connect Mr. Bensah. So your very final wrap-up comment on how the African Union can really live up, be much more proactive on issues of electoral transition for peace and good governance.
Well, you know, the legal framework that we have at the moment is enough to deal with any election dispute on the continent. The problem is the political will. The problem is the decision, the AU organs and institution making decision to do A, B, C, D, E. You have the situation in Mozambique. If the AU says, I give SADC 1 week or 2 weeks to deal with the matter, if SADC is unwilling to deal with the matter, I will take over. That's for me a real political decision and a leadership action. ECOWAS at the AU at the moment lacks leadership, and that's why we are in this kind of situation, because we have everything. We have the legal framework, we have the institution, we have the procedures, we have everything. But if somebody doesn't want to act, there is nothing you can do about it. That's where we are. That's where we are in our continent. And that's why we are failing every single day. And we are just counting the dead people. In just this week, in 1 day, 125 Mozambicans died simply because they were contesting the result of the election. Can we accept that in the 21st century? No, we can't. We can't. And this is not the first time SADC is acting in this way. Even the recent the election in Namibia, it went peacefully at the end, but the contestation was high. How can you organize an election? My brother, how can you organize an election in 5 days? 5 consecutive days. That means that nothing was working properly. And it means that at the end of the day, there will be a problem of the legitimity question of that regime will come up. And that's why intervening at the right time, doing the right thing, and making sure that people abide by the norms, principles, and rules is really very important for us.
So you heard our guest extensively having a deeper conversation on the role of the African Union in mediating peaceful transition of power in the sub-region and of course on the continent at large. Our guests were governance expert Dr. Ibrahima Kane and Ecowas and AU policy analyst Emmanuel Bensah. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We'll come your way same time next week. Until then, Merry Christmas and a prosperous Happy New Year to you.